Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday, and welcome to another episode of the Urban Files, a show where we discuss the latest news and development in the cities where we work, live, and play. So, welcome in. And Max, I know that you, of course, have been nomading in general around America over the last few months. And I know one of the places that you visited recently for around a month or so was Merida, Mexico, which is well reputed for being one of the safest cities in Mexico and in all of Latin America, and for being a central kind of repository for the history of the Mayan Empire. So, Max, what I first wanted to touch on was you obviously lived there for a longer period of time than a typical tourist. It's basically nomad life as you described it. So, which part of Merida would you stay in? Did you stay in for locals to describe the city? And what did you think of it? What were the amenities, and what was your overall experience like?
Yeah, we stayed in two areas, although they were adjacent to each other. We stayed in Paseo de Montejo, which is the sort of it's sort of part of the CBD. I mean, not exactly. Centro Historico is south, and then Paseo de Montejo is a little bit north. But it's if you look at it as sort of a larger urban core area than where we were that first week was on the northern side of that. It's more or less in the middle of the action. And then for the remaining 3 weeks, we moved out to Garcia Jimenez, which is a much more of a locals neighborhood directly west of Paseo de Montejo. So we got two different environments, one sort of again, like I said, in the middle of the action, and then one more of a neighborhood feel, but they were very close, relatively close to each other.
That's cool. And Paseo de Montejo, from my limited understanding of the city and region, is kind of a place where it's almost like a Champs-Élysées kind of running up from that central district. How far would you say you were from like the main square? Because I mean, that's kind of like a lot of Latin American cities are kind of on that grid where they have that kind of Plaza de Armas or similar center of commerce and politics and governance. So how big is that central area?
Um, it's about a mile, maybe slightly more. So where we were staying specifically to that main plaza would be a mile. So it was definitely within walking distance if you want to do that. Um, and then we were about a mile west when we went out to Garcia Jimenez. So it's all possible to walk if you want to do the walk. Can be a little bit far. And then of course there's the option for Ubers, which is what, and Didis, which we relied on for the most part. So the Plaza Grande is the main square. Very, very popular gathering place for tourists and locals. That's not always the case in every city you go to, where like there's one really main square that is where people are actually hanging out at. But in Merida's case, it was. There's a lot of programming centered around that square. And then it's just like it's a beautiful, relaxing area as well. So that plaza is not the southern end of Centro. It's kind of in the middle, so you can go further south if you wanted to. And then as I said, we stayed at the Hyatt Regency when we were in Paseo de Montejo. So we were near the northern end, but not quite all the way. I'd say for the area that's really quite popular, I'd say the northern end would be like Monumento a la Patria, which is a very large it's this symbol in the center of a little traffic circle. So it has a very grand image. And as I said, it's kind of like an homage to the fatherland. So
Okay, that's pretty cool. So, and Monumento a la Patria, that's actually the name of the monument in Mexico City too, that I think was from when us Americans, invaded Mexico City back in the 1840s in a defense of the hilltop where Castillo Chapultepec now stands. So that's interesting that they have another one there. I'm not as familiar with the military and general geopolitical history of Mexico as I would like to be, but it is interesting to see that it's so detailed in such a commemorated story around. So, of course, you kind of got more of like a historic center, urban center type thing. And you also, it sounds like stayed in more of like a local, maybe a little more suburban type area to the west. I'm not sure if that's correct, but comparing those two areas, which one would you say that you'd favor? I mean, I know it sounds like you'd probably go back, and then I guess also you didn't really you mentioned more of like Uber and kind of walking some. Is the public transportation, is there not much to be said for that in Merida as a whole, or did you just not have that much experience with it directly?
I'll say the last question I'll answer first. I think that it does exist and it is usable. It's just not that convenient when for us an Uber is perfectly within budget. So
Well, there's four of you guys, so it does work pretty
yeah,
well.
yeah. Plus with four of us, then it kind of tilts the scales if they were close in favor of getting a vehicle. In busy times, to get from one side of town to another, I mean, not all the way, but to cover a good amount of ground in peak times, a ride share could be like $5. So it could be a little bit more, but that's generally the max that we would see. And then in non-peak times, or if we're just going a mile or two, you're looking at like $1. So
Wow, that's
on the low end. So it would usually, most of our trips we were somewhere in like the $3 range. And granted, transit could be much cheaper, I would expect, but far less convenient. So door
yeah,
to door, when we step out of our apartment, it just made sense. So unfortunately, I never did try out the transit, just for the experience.
yeah,
Um, Now, yeah, you could say Garcia Jimenez is kind of the suburbs in the same sense of like a inner ring suburb or something. It's Merida is a very large sort of circle,
mhm,
um, and uh, quite a few expats live on the north side. Westerners, a lot of the well-developed infrastructure and Western amenities and comforts are very prevalent on the northern side of Merida, and we could be talking a a good distance, like 30 minutes drive, in normal traffic. And so us staying in Garcia Jimenez, just like a 2 or 3 minute drive west, um, it puts it into perspective of, sure, we were kind of outside and we were in a different sort of environment, but we were still very close to Centro, very close to Paseo de Montejo. So in that sense, it's not really like the suburbs that like some of us may think of if we're US centric. Um, but it did present a different feel. It was a lot calmer, a lot quieter in our neighborhood, and not as many restaurants to walk to. I had another family staying a few blocks from us, and they lamented that there weren't. They were thinking, because this was a popular residential neighborhood, they were thinking there would be a lot more places of commerce to walk to. And I think when you dig below the surface, there are, when you get to know the place, then there are, every block has like, something, some restaurant, some cafe, but it's not visually, it's not obvious. It's not like you just take a stroll down the street and then you'll see all the tons of restaurants or anything like that. So it was a nice place, enjoyable for us, for our 3 weeks there. But I think my wife would, if we return, she was saying we definitely should be more in Centro or Paseo de Monteo, just more where the immediate action is. I I think you know I we probably won't do a long stay in the future, so that's not where my head is at. So then, in that sense, it definitely makes sense to be
Or like a vacation?
yeah. But if somebody was telling me we're going back for like 2 months, um, I'd have to think long and hard about it because the price difference was huge just
Yeah.
going that mile west. So our we were staying at a hotel, granted, so that's part of the difference, but it was still a massive difference going from Hyatt Regency, which we got a fantastic deal on, in my opinion.
Mhm.
We were paying around $100 a night,
Yeah.
but at a very, very nice hotel. But then when we went to Garcia Henares, we were paying about $39 a night for a
Oh wow. Yeah.
two bedroom, two bathroom apartment, much, much larger,
Yeah.
with a kitchen, full kitchen and everything. So that, two and a half times. And also, the hotel Hyatt Regency probably won't be around $100 again for a while. That was a good price for us, but every time I've checked since then, it's been, 20-30% more. So that's always going to be the trade-off when you're choosing neighborhoods. When you're in the center of the action, it's always going to be more expensive. But whether the price difference is worth it, it'll depend on the exact prices, the exact dates that we're looking at. One other place to consider if we were going back for long term would be sort of the northern neighborhoods where, as I said, many expats live. There are quite a few, half a dozen or so, that are popular areas, and they offer what they offer is really nice housing. So you're not looking at like in the city housing, but you're looking at more luxurious, more space. Um, and then you also get closer to the beach. So if you're in the centro of Merida, you're looking at about 45 minutes to an hour, depending on traffic, to get to the beaches north of the city. But if you're up in the northern suburbs already, then you can cut that in half to like 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So
It's good to know. And I mean, I'm envious because Merida at this point is probably highest, if not top three, on my cities that I tend to visit in North America, and maybe top 10 on my world list. I mean, part of it is my fascination with pre-Columbian major civilizations. So really, having had that more in-depth experience with the Aztecs and Incas at this point, kind of getting the Mayan Empire there to kind of complete the trifecta. So it's good to hear about all this and to hear about the parts of the city. Broadly speaking, if you were a nomad, what types of things about Merida would you specifically find appealing, or what would be the biggest selling points? And what types of stuff would you do? Kind of both as like a bigger, like, ooh, I'm going out on the weekend and having a good time adventuring, and more just kind of local comforts and charms.
yeah, I think Merida is, for obvious reasons, is a very popular landing spot for nomads and expats. Assuming that you are not working locally, right? You have a remote job where you're retired. Um, the obvious draw is the incredibly affordable price tag for housing, for food, entertainment. Pretty much everything is cheaper than a sort of low to average cost place in America. Just with the one caveat which applies to all sort of international destinations is that if you want sort of the exact experience and brands that you have from back home, then those will be more expensive than they would be back home. So if you're living by adopting sort of the Merida and Mexican lifestyle, then you're going to save a substantial amount of money versus sort of average place in America. Um, on top of that, Merida is known as sort of the safest city in Mexico. They build themselves second safest in North America, which implicitly, because number one is in Canada, they're implicitly suggesting that they're the safer than any city in America, in the United
Yeah.
States of America. Um, the the yeah, so the feeling of safety is sort of subjective to a degree, because you're talking about sort of the comfort that you feel, and not necessarily the actual statistics.
Right.
And um, and I would say, based on 1 month experience, it definitely feels like you don't need to have your guard up the way you might in sort of Cancun or in Mexico City. Merida is sort of a bastion of sort of just laid back, chill. And we've talked about this extensively, like why that may be, theorizing, related to politicians, related to cartels. But I would say, just without getting into all of that, it does feel that way. It does feel safer. Um, and so those are the two selling points: the affordability and the safety. I think those are the very broad selling points. Now, for somebody who's particularly curious about Yucatan food, or Yucatecan food, I guess, or Mayan culture and history, there's going to be other attractions. The For me, the most obvious negative is the heat.
Mm-hmm.
We were there in early to mid-February, and it was already getting very hot at that time. By the end of February, early March, it was blazing hot, and we came to find out that once you get to, I think, April and May, it's the hottest times of the year. So it's a little bit earlier than you might expect, given the sort of U.S. seasonal cycle.
The rain season probably almost cools it a little bit relative to where it would be.
Correct. Yeah. So Merida in the summertime isn't the hottest in Merida, but it is still very hot. So really what we discovered talking to locals and just looking at the numbers is that like December and January would be the times to visit.
Yeah.
And then the other 10 months of the year, you're going to be dealing with intense heat. So that's the biggest attraction, is having to handle the heat. And when we talk about that, we're talking about, you know, Fahrenheit is like upper 90s, consistently
Probably
throughout the
heat
day.
index is pushing 110s and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
I mean, I would say by like 9:30 or 10 a.m., you feel it and you don't want to be outside anymore.
Yeah.
And then by, maybe 6 o'clock is when it starts to feel tolerable again. So if you can stay indoors for like a good chunk of the day and then just only go out in the morning or in the evening, then it works well for you.
Yeah.
Evening time, nighttime is beautiful, very nice, very comfortable, and so you just have to wait it out.
Yeah.
There's I likened the place to Penang, Malaysia, because of similar size, similar sort of attractiveness for international travelers, for expats. You have pretty strong infrastructure for those things, as well as a pretty large community now of folks from everywhere. So it's not like you feel isolated. You definitely can connect with people from all over the world. And then there's the sort of exoticness of it as well, the food. People who are there rave about the food, similarly to people in Penang, right? And so those are sort of similarities I saw between those places. Also, Penang's also hot and humid and got lots of mosquitoes. So Merida, mosquitoes are a problem, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's worse than many other places. So it was just a problem for us, but it doesn't stand out perhaps in that way. So I didn't mention that before, but those were our two negatives, I guess, was heat and
Okay.
mosquitoes for my wife and I. Last thing to mention as far as sort of any negatives would be that Merida, just by comparison to Mexico City, where we spent a lot of time as well, it's not a big city. It's not tiny. It's a little over 1 million population, so you've got plenty of the amenities that would make you comfortable, make somebody feel comfortable, things to do, stuff like that. But it's not gonna have an overabundance of diversity and cultural amenities and all the different stuff that you may get in a much larger place. So that in terms of staying long term, that's a sort of a negative for us. If you want to find a place that's affordable that you can just relax and chill, then it could be the right place.
Yeah. Well, that's good to know, and I appreciate that. I think you covered it well. As you said, I mean, in population, it's more similar to a Buffalo than in New York City. But honestly, I think there's a fair amount of people out there that might prefer a more, laid back place like that for that. And again, that proximity to the beach you talk about. And, I mean, obviously Cancun is much more popular with American tourists, but as you pointed out, it's had major security issues recently and rise in crime there. So, I appreciate you giving us all insight onto that, and we'll have to, kind of follow up with your adventures, and maybe check out another place from this lens.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, have a good week, everyone.